Doctor Who, Millennial Rites by Craig Hinton. Read by an AI-generated deepfake of Colin Baker. No copyright infringement is intended. Part 2. The newly opened chapel suite of the Dorchester Hotel was packed, surrounded by antique mahogany tables and Chippendale chairs with unbelievably heavy crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. The civil service mandarins floated round the buffet with prim expressions and prissy small talk, while junior ministers from all four of the major parties made polite but pointed conversation amongst the wine and the canapes. And sitting at the centre of the celebration, trying to make out that she was enjoying the whole shebang, was a woman whose expression made it embarrassingly clear that she wasn't. Despite the fact that today was her 50th birthday, she was modestly aware that she had aged well. Her high cheekbones and thin, arched eyebrows, coupled with good skin and doe-like eyes, definitely belied her 5 decades. And although her once black hair was now shot through with grey, she looked 10 years younger. But Dame Anne Travers OBE, scientific advisor to the cabinet and reason for the party, was well aware that she was in great danger of becoming a right party pooper. All these people, here to celebrate the fact that she hadn't died yet, all eating and drinking and taking absolutely no real notice of her, save the odd hello and how are you? She shuddered at the hypocrisy of it all, and at the inappropriate choice of location. She had risen through the ranks, from scientist to civil servant, before finally replacing Rachel Jensen as chief scientific advisor to the cabinet. Anne had held that position for the last 18 years, offering her advice and counsel to successive governments. Every aspect of British scientific policy had fallen under her remit, from the aborted attempt to tap geothermal energy early on in her tenure to the British space programme of the 1980s. But her greatest professional success had been the UK branch of UNIT, the United Nations Intelligence Task Force. Under her, it had received enough funding to become an example to the rest of the UN of how to run a paramilitary organisation and repel alien invasions into the bargain. But throughout that period, 2 subjects had been guaranteed to elicit strong emotions within her. One of UNIT's earliest enemies, and the man standing on the other side of the suite that he had paid for, the suite that bore his name. Ashley Chappell, philanthropist and genius, the man who had destroyed her father's life. And when she discovered which of her underlings had reckoned that the chapel suite at the Dorchester would make a perfect place to celebrate her birthday, she would bounce them around Whitehall and right out of the door. "Care for a drink, Dame Anne?" The voice was charming yet forceful, and Anne couldn't help but look up from her reverie. The man addressing her was tall and heavily built and dressed in the boringly ubiquitous dinner suit worn by all of the male attendees. His hair was curly and light brown, and his face was friendly and obviously capable of deep passions. He was holding 2 glasses of white wine. Anne rose from her chair and took a glass. "Thank you, but I don't believe I've had the pleasure," she said, smiling, falsely. "I'm afraid you have, Dame Anne," the man grinned, "but it was a long, long time ago." He squeezed her hand. "I'm the doctor." Anne stared at him as if he were mad, which of course he was. The doctor was a small man, with a mop of dark hair and an impish expression, a man whose knowledge had helped both her and her father in their personal crises. A man who would have understood the problems that weighed so heavily on her mind, not this imposing figure who brimmed with arrogance and bravado. He stepped back and held up his hands. "I admit, I'm not your father's doctor, but I am the genuine article. All the same, if you want proof—" He placed his glass on a nearby table and reached into his black jacket, producing an object which made Anne gasp as he held it on the flat of his left hand. "Recognize it," he whispered ominously, rolling the ball around on his palm. It was all too familiar and all too intimate. She grabbed the shiny silver sphere without asking and turned it over in her hands as if it burnt. The surface reflected her face and hair in pink swirls and grey loops of confusion, mirroring both her looks and feelings. "Where did you get this?" she hissed, and then louder. "Where? Hush!" muttered the man, making her aware of the increasingly curious audience with an askance nod. "If you need further proof, I retrieved it from a deactivated Yeti near the Goodge Street platform of the Northern Line about 25 years ago." His tone changed to one of long-standing annoyance. After Jamie and Colonel Lethbridge Stewart accidentally thwarted my plans to destroy the Great Intelligence, that is. Anne staggered back and grabbed the arm of her chair, ignoring the stares from the other guests, vaguely aware of the doctor grabbing the falling sphere with an underhand catch and dropping it into her handbag. A small portion of her mind accepted the fact that the stranger was the same man who had helped her father against the intelligence in the Tibetan mountains, who had then turned up 40 years later, looking not a day older, to fight the same evil in a web-ensnared London. It was helped by the circumstantial evidence. Lethbridge Stewart's mysterious scientific advisor, instrumental in the 2 Auton attacks, the Axon presence, the Zygon gambit with the Loch Ness monster. Wasn't that scientific advisor called the Doctor? And a report that had arrived on her desk only a few months ago, from Brigadier Winifred Bambera, wasn't it, had mentioned the invaluable help provided by UNIT's former scientific advisor in the Carberry situation. And weren't there 4 totally different descriptions of this doctor, a scruffy clown, a debonair dandy, a bohemian, and an imp with a Scots burr? Why shouldn't this tall man with his fruity expression and cat-like manner be yet another version of the same person? Glorious, glorious rationalization. But it didn't stand a chance against the deep-seated terror that preyed on her mind every second of the waking day and in every corner of her nightmares, her greatest fear. And it was intimately connected with the doctor. She couldn't help the outburst that exploded from her. "So why the hell have you come this time? Another visitation by the intelligence?" She knew that she was shouting, but she didn't care. She didn't care about the mandarins, with their holier-than-thou expressions. She wasn't worried about the leader of the opposition, all handbag and perm, raising her eyebrows in indignation. She ignored Prince William's alarmed look. She didn't even care about Ashley Chappell himself, who turned from his conversation with the Defence Minister and gave her a quizzical stare. All she cared about was that her greatest fears stood personified in front of her, greeting her like a long-lost friend, his handshake the precursor to death and horror and alien invasion. "No," he said quietly, smiling with understanding. "I've come to celebrate your birthday." She deflated, sinking her body into the chair and her face in her hands. I'm sorry." The doctor knelt down next to her. That sounded like a heartfelt plea for help, Anne. He grabbed her shaking hand. "Would you like to tell me about it?" Anne's feelings were in turmoil. This had been meant as a happy occasion, one where she could wallow in the plaudits and praise from her friends, rivals, and outright enemies, while nibbling the odd vol-au-vent and passing an inconsequential few words with the chief whip or a minor Whitehall dignitary. And although things had started badly, the chapel suite indeed, she hadn't really been prepared to enjoy herself anyway. But seeing the doctor was making it unimaginably worse, bringing back all the dreadful memories that had haunted her over the last 25 years, since her first encounter with the Great Intelligence and its furry robot hordes. She didn't move from the chair, aware that her whole body was shivering uncontrollably. "I've kept it to myself for all these years," she whispered, an admission and a plea in one. "I think we need to talk," said the doctor reassuringly. "At least you need to talk." She dabbed at her eyes with a paper tissue, hurriedly retrieved from her handbag, and managed a weak smile. I'd like that."